All right, we're recording, and this is Alexander Schmid with Wesley Schantz, and this is Side Quests, episode 001. And Wes, welcome to this new medium and this new theme and this new content that we're going through, and it's great to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. I'm excited about this. This is something we've been talking about for a few weeks now. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. We've been talking about it, and now we've got some new technology going together. I can actually see you. We can, it's a little more sophisticated, and we actually had some homework to prepare for this. And two things. The homework was to watch the movie Spirited Away, which I really have to thank you just for the opportunity to watch that movie and to watch that movie in a more scholarly way, or a more, articulated way, a more sophisticated way. There we go. But also, I can't help but mention, especially today, that today, listeners, was the first day that Mr. Wesley Schantz released his very first podcast. And I had a chance to listen to it, not only once, but once and a half. And I already want to hear more. He says he's only doing it once a week, and we got to convince him to do more. But also to keep talking to us here too. But you were talking about Earthbound and Hamlet, and you suggested that you were going to bring the great books into what you were doing there, like one great book per episode of Earthbound a week. And would you be interested in introducing your podcast a little here, even though I know we want to talk about Spirited Away?
Oh, well, yeah. No, it's thanks for the opportunity to plug this a little bit. It's something I have been wanting to do for a long time. Make a podcast or make a video about Earthbound. And I was talking to another friend on the phone the other night, and he sort of challenged me to just go ahead and get started on it. So I have so many sort of places that I want to go with it that it was kind of hard to pick just one to start from. But I began with a character called Buzz, who is briefly with your party in the beginning of the game, and that line in Hamlet where he says Buzz is what I kind of wove into the discussion of Earthbound. And I thought it was really fun to do, and I think I learned a little bit about both Shakespeare and the video game. And I said one a week because that's kind of something I can actually, I hope actually produce, and I want to try to make it a kind of a regular thing. So get into a good habit here, and yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe just to get the juices flowing before we get into Spirited Away, would you mind if I ask you a couple of questions that arose for me while listening to your podcast, specifically about Buzz, just to start off with? So it's interesting, a claim that Dr. Jordan Peterson makes about the Golden Snitch in Harry Potter and the Seekers looking after it. Golden Snitch, he says, is an ancient alchemical a symbol called the Winged Chaos. And it indicates what attention is, how it jumps all over everywhere, and where your interest is. You don't exactly choose, you more discover, and that's why children are supposed to do so many different things, just to discover what they're passionate in and what they're good at, which is very interesting, which is why it's always troubling when the arts start to disappear from schools, because who knows who you would miss out on. And so the idea of Buzz there, well, two ideas that occurred to me were that he might, since he is sort of golden guide that flits about you, represent something like the snitch, and how you are directed by the self, which is your future self, which directs you. So the Jungians say through your interests. Well, he is a future superior self that flies above, you said, the ground, and therefore is sort of not intangible, because of course he gets squashed, but is not subject to the same terrestrial rules that you are, because he's more spiritual, or an image that draws you forward into the future, and that's why he's from the future.
Totally.
I wanted to run that idea by you first, and then I had a second idea about him.
Yeah, well, I think it ties in really nicely. Part of what I talked about today was like, I don't know how much there is an intentional, right, like reference to these things.
No, of course.
but that's the nature of attention, right? Attention is to notice things and say, well, what if this could relate to that? And so, yeah, he's a great image for the beginning of a project or of a quest, right? Because your attention is going everywhere, flitting around, and yet he's sort of he's this being from the future, which has a message for you, which can sort of direct you in a dangerous but meaningful path. Yeah.
And actually based on that is the fact that he occurred at the same moment that there was an alien crash made perfect sense to me, because at that moment, he coming from the future indicates a shift in the ideal future, right? Because of this moment that happened that nobody could have suspected, the future has now changed. Their ideal vision of the future is no longer operant. Boom. So somebody sent from a different future back into the past saying, ooh, actually, it's not going to be that way. Sort of like Terminator, right? And but it indicates that when something unexpected happens, you have to shift your idea of the future. And so who helps you to do that? A representative from a future that you could not have expected, who has wisdom from that future in order to guide you, to keeping you from that sort of dystopian future, or helping to guide you towards that utopian future. And actually, which one is it for Buzz? Because I haven't played the game, so I'm really actually looking forward to listening. I'm like a bad student. I'm gonna like listen to the lectures and not play the game, but maybe I'll get a chance to. But
hey, we're gonna be going at a nice slow pace, so it's probably on the order of 20 minutes or 30 minutes maybe of play time per week or something like that. Okay. So I highly recommend playing the game when and if you get a chance. But to the point about what kind of future he's coming from, a terrible a future in which all is chaos and destruction. And it's sort of like
Trunks from the sort of like from Dragon Ball Z, like Trunks from Dragon Ball Z, sort of.
Yeah.
Just
same kind of
side quests.
It's definitely to the point of being a cliche in sci-fi and anime and all that stuff. But with that said, it's at the same time, and this is something I'm going to touch on at some point in the show, is that there's the paradox there, right? The paradox of a being from another reality which intervenes in this reality to change it, to move it in a different direction. And I think that's a kind of a picture of, or another version of the paradox of having, say, the prophet, right, the prophetic vision, and sort of self-fulfilling or something like that, or even
the prophet has a vision, right? And so these representations are visual representations from the future of an alternate sort of future, right? So, Jordan Peterson says that the reason we develop the imagination, the evolutionary psychologist suggests, is so that we can represent sensory motor actions in the world that might get us killed or infected or predated on, so that we don't actually have to have these things happen. And so the idea there is, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. First time on this.
There's a lot going on.
That's what I find out listening to my podcast, that there's a lot going on. I need to get my values straight, apparently, so I'm not trying to throw everything out all at once. But I guess I heard Camille Paglia speak once, and I was like, if rapidity of speech is indication of intelligence, then she's not going to win, neither is Ben Shapiro. As smart as they are and as wonderful as they are, and as much as I love to listen to them and would love someday to talk to them, but
oh yeah,
small fish thinking about big fish there.
So it seems like you're saying like there's a vicarious experience which you can
right.
Have,
so the very genre of sci-fi is projecting an imagined or ideal future out there and making it dystopian or utopian, and seeing what changes, and sort of so that we can think broadly about how we're going to shape the future together, you might say. So the whole idea of why sci-fi never got anywhere is because it's like it only ever represents the future that we either want to bring about or don't want to bring about. That's all it ever has done, because that's what the imagination does for us, which is why, and this is something that's figured in our conversations, it's so necessary for us to sort of have collective epics in order to share, say, a collective vision, because it shows us where we've been and how we've gotten through certain obstacles that we've been through, and therefore teaches us how to unify in order to get through obstacles, including obstacles like thinking there's no such thing as unity, or obstacles and thus suffering dissolution, both in our psyches and in our body politic, in our corpus, and our body as a people too. I would say that we're what seems to be afflicting us is sort of like what afflicts the gifted student, like the Sylvia Plath after finishing undergrad. It's like, man, we really achieved quite a bit, and well, what's left, and certainly there is plenty left to do in the world, and we don't have everything dialed in at all. But it seems like part of what's afflicting us as a people is not having that collective unity through a collective ideal, through a collective pursuit. And perhaps that's because we don't share all the same collective stories now. And I don't mean that in a propagandistic way, but it's as if we've devalued the power of the word with words. And in so doing, we've also depowered the power of the story, which is a larger version of the word, the meaningful collection of words, and thus wisdom. And so doing that, then, if you question the value of something, maybe you don't ingest it. Maybe you never give it the proper consideration. And well, maybe that actually hurts you because we live in a society based on the principles within several of these stories, and certainly these ancient philosophers. And to the extent that we don't understand and then consciously embrace the principles upon which the place we are is founded, it strikes me that it's like we're like a sick person eating Cheetos who just would maybe not eat Cheetos if he understood that maybe some, chicken and rice would be a little more healthy or healthier.
Yeah. Well, it's like you're saying, like we're the story that we're telling is a Cheetos story, and the story we're telling is a chicken and rice story.
Doesn't touch on anything nutritious. That's right. It's based off statistics and colors and new technology, and not necessarily off of heart, which is what we all seem to be striving for, and not just heart, but also some genuine intelligence. I think we're noticing that it's like, well, if you don't value these things consciously as a people, it seems like they can kind of start to disappear. And even if they're not disappearing, maybe not be as prevalent as we would like them to be, or at least not be highlighted in the culture as much as we would like them to be either. Because if they're not being highlighted, well, they're probably not being highlighted because we're not valuing that sort of thing. Though, that's sort of a hard claim to make, given like what the Marvel movies seem to be highlighting.
Right. It's just that the stories have ramified in so many new manifestations that I think part of the work, at least what I'm interested in doing, is sort of like looking at those beautiful flowers on the ends of the branch and trace them back towards the roots, and look at essentially the same story that's been there is still there, and just the way that it's playing out is new and different. And so that's what I like about like to get into Spirited Away here,
right?
Which we both have just recently rewatched, right? I don't know, how many times have you watched that movie?
Like 6 or 7 times. And something interesting about that, not only mentioning that, but also Earthbound, is that we're also expanding our purview from simply Western works of literature and art into Eastern ones. And I think Spirited Away is a particularly good one, as well as Earthbound, because these were works that had to be translated into English for American culture. And in fact, Spirited Away, if you watch the Art of Spirited Away, which is included with the DVD, it's like 16 minutes long. John Lasseter talks about there were strong negotiations between Disney and Hayao Miyazaki. Miyazaki wanted to make sure that everything was perfect, that the translations were great, but Disney said, we need your whole corpus if we're going to do business with you. And so there was a major East-West sort of negotiation going on, even to get access to Hayao Miyazaki's work. And then, well, what do we find lying in there? Well, it seems like we found some universal stories that I think we have something to talk about. I might have to grab my phone in some second to check some of the notes that I sent to you. But, well, yeah, where did you want to start exactly?
Oh, yeah. Well, so one thing about the movie that I just wanted to start with was that the first couple of times I watched it, it didn't really make sense to me. I certainly didn't see the underlying similarity, right, between this story and the classic sort of fairy tale stories that I'm familiar with.
Sure.
And then watching it a few more times, right? The reason that I kept watching it was because I knew that there was something really interesting there. I knew that from my own experience, but also from, I think it's John Lasseter who's on the start of the movie. He like gives you a plug, right, saying you're about to see something really cool, right? And I sort of like trusted him, you know, like he seems to know a lot about this, so it's obviously really good. I just don't quite get it, you know. So what is this movie about? Like, let's maybe just start there. Like, what is the summary of what's going on? Because there's points at which it doesn't make a lot of sense the first time through. So there's going to be some significant spoilers here for anyone listening who hasn't seen the movie.
That's fair. That's good that you said that. So I'll start with a brief summary. So a 10-year-old girl, Chihiro, who's based on Hayao Miyazaki, the artist and directors, and he hand drew, I believe, every single scene for this. Wow. I think that's what old animators used to do, and that's precisely why they don't do that anymore, because it's so much work and it takes so much time, and so that costs a lot of money, because time is money, and that makes sense. But it means that they put a lot of heart into these works as well, a lot of soul. And so actually something interesting about Spirited Away is that the art precedes the story. The story unfolds from the art, and so the word is articulated in conjunction with the scenes that are already sort of there. Seems to be what they said that they did in the art of Spirited Away, which is very interesting. So the art literally does speak to them and speaks for itself first, you might say. We just supply the words. So this 10-year-old girl, Chihiro, has just had to leave her former situation, is going now into unexplored territory with her mother and her father. And so they're sort of a typical suburban family. And she's complaining. She's a whiny little girl saying, I just got a bouquet, and the reason I got the bouquet is because I had to leave for the first time. Isn't that depressing? So she's very she's a martyr, basically. And her mother and her father, they're not very attentive. They're like the typical inattentive parents, you might say. Her mother says, don't complain, you'll like this new place. And the dad is sort of focused on getting them there. Well, the first indication of trouble is that they see their home, but also as they approach a trail, a sort of shortcut, as it were, that has interesting candles within small stone structures on the side, like little ritualistic, it looks like presents that would be left for spirits or something like that, which, you know, is sort of foreshadowing that we're leaving the beaten path, as it were. We're going to somewhere more natural and therefore magical as well. And so the dad starts driving, and he drives characteristically way too fast, and they end up getting to slamming on the brakes, and they find themselves in an old theme park. And well, I'm going to go a little faster here because I can't focus on every scene quite that much unless we want to be here all night. And they end up at a theme park where there's food being prepared, and the parents start eating and eating and eating without, however, and actually let's start here. So the parents are eating and eating. And the assumption made by them is that, well, since they have money, they can pay what's necessary. So just to go back to what I teach the Odyssey, there's a major assumption that is often wrong in the Odyssey. For instance, when Odysseus and his men go into Polyphemus's cave, the Cyclops, and assume they can just eat, wrong, and they end up getting eaten. When they assume that they can just eat on the Isle of the Sun under Eurylochus's false leadership, his Luciferian leadership, the men say, oh, we could just pay for this later. They literally say the same thing in a slightly different way, where they say, well, you know, we can sacrifice to Apollo and make a grand sacrifice and make a temple to him when we get back to Ithaca. And so he'll accept that, but unfortunately that's not how sacrifice works. You have to give the sacrifice and then get the reward, not vice versa.
They're placing themselves in the position of the god in a way, right? They're eating the sacrifice. They're not making the sacrifice. They're
assuming the agreement of the god. Which is the problem. The god may or may not agree with them, and this is the story of Cain and Abel, right? Depending on their sacrifice. So if they give a very good sacrifice, perhaps the god will assent. But, you know, and this is also one of Jesus's temptations, right? When Lucifer says, well, why don't you just jump off the cliff, and then, you know, God will help you to fly. And Jesus,
make these stones into bread.
Yeah, tempt not the Lord my God, and so the idea is that you can't assume the agreement. You can't assume that you know what's going to happen. You have your intention, and you can try and set your action plan into motion, but what's going to happen in reality, not your province. So that seems to be the issue. There is that they are in unknown territory, and they are treating it as if the rules of known territory apply to it. So rather than investigating appropriately the new territory in an alert and anxious manner, as Chihiro does, they approach the situation incautiously and are thus taken off the chessboard immediately. They don't have what it takes to be to operate within this new world.
Yeah, and that sort of like sets the story in motion in a way, because that's the moment that Chihiro walks away from them.
Yes.
And so she separates herself for the first time. She's so like sort of disgusted and put off by their this like ravenously.
They're eating and they're already looking like pigs.
Yeah, and she walks away, and the music swells in that moment. And that's one of the first parts of the movie that I was like, why is the music making this such a dramatic thing? I just wasn't paying close enough attention. It's the first time she walks away from them and separates and sort of becomes her own person.
Yes.
So I noticed that this time watching it, and I loved the music swell there. It's like, this is the moment the movie really, like the quest begins for her, right? And,
yes, and so that's when she, of course, meets her male version of, say, Athena or Beatrice, or the Jungians would say a figure of the animus, that which draws a woman into society. That would be Haku, who is, of course, also symbolically what? A dragon, a figure of the unknown. And why anthropomorphized as human? Because he draws you into the unknown, from the known into the unknown, and then back vice versa. And actually, we'll see that transition from Haku. We'll see him go from just man to her, to dragon man, to dragon, back to man who is holding her hand. And so he will draw her into the unknown, and then also bring the unknown back into known territory for her, thus expanding her personality. And so he actually meets her, and where does he meet her? Of course, on a bridge.
Right on the bridge.
On a bridge, right in the middle of the bridge, where she will later meet No Face when she retraces her steps after her first night there, which is something she does. Which I'm thinking we're probably going to have to do multiple conversations on this, just because it seems like there's a lot that we're going to have to go through. So maybe you can only do your podcast once a week, because we're going to have to do this every day. We're going to have to do this on seminar days. Maybe we can call them Wes and Alex's seminars and do them Monday and Thursday or something.
Stuff comes up. Yeah, stuff comes up. But, well, so it's like the thing about the questions there, like part of it is that it seems like the portrayal of the dragonish is very different in the traditional Eastern stories versus the traditional Western stories, and it's not like immediately clear that Haku is anything but another person,
right?
Because he doesn't look like
that magic. That
he doesn't look like the other spirits, though. Right? All the other spirits are sort of these shadowy figures that emerge as the lights go down, as night falls and the lights turn on in the theme park. All these shadowy figures, they've sort of always been there, but you couldn't see them until that twilight.
Right.
And they become more substantial, but they're never quite like other people. And Haku looks like a person. And so it's really interesting that then, he can do like this really cool magic thing that
he sets everything into motion. That's what he is as the animus. He sets the transformation of Chihiro into into motion. In fact, he and Yubaba work as archetypes of the collective unconscious, I would say, to her. Him as the animus and her as the old wise woman, or as the woman at the top of the dominance hierarchy who finds Chihiro at the bottom wanting, right? She's useless. In fact, she says she's useless. And in fact, every archetype will say to Chihiro that she is useless, including Kamaji, who will say, I can't use you. And in fact, that is what we say to the youth when they're very young. In fact, being a high school teacher, that's precisely how we start to treat them when we begin high school, right? It's like, boom, now you're sort of an adult, but you're the worst sort of adult because you have no skills, you have no discipline, you You don't even know how to act yet. And so you're at the bottom of everything. And so everything, including your own emotions, find you wanting. So you have to get better, better, better. And in fact, well, that's what makes Chihiro start to get better, right? Everybody around her is giving her the feedback that she's not enough. In fact, her coworkers are much better than her at the job. She's at the low end of the stick. And she even has trouble convincing Yubaba and Kamaji that she has any value beyond zero at first.
But this is really important, right? That she does, right? She does have this kind of strength of will to hear all these people telling her this, and yet know, like, I need to work, like,
right.
That's what I'm going to do. That's what I have to do. And she's really firm on that. And it's sort of, I think it's a really powerful portrayal, again, to go back to that word, right, of something that we're really fond of, but we wouldn't quite do it that way, right? Like, it seems like there is in fairy tales that we're familiar with, there isn't such an emphasis on the nothingness of the character. There's always like some kind of, like, whether it's a relic from a father that's been passed down, or some like super strength or something in the character, and she's like such a normal, regular old kid, and yet there's this thing in her where she knows that she must sort of become somebody, right? And I think that's well, like in the moment when she's really scared about going down the stairs to find the boiler room. Do you remember that part?
Yeah.
Like, and there's like this moment when she sort of like slips, and then she's just like running, you know?
Yes. Yes, that struck me as how incremental increase becomes exponential.
Yeah.
But
like,
even before that, just something interesting is that when she walks away from her parents, like you said, you noticed the score rising and the initial separation. That's when a human realizes that his or her parents, his true parents, who he's projected the archetype of great father and great mother onto, are no longer his regular parents. And that starts around adolescence, right? That you're like, how could these individuals who are so flawed be gods? And it's like, well, no, actually, they're not gods. They're just the people who are stewarded with the divine duty of raising you. And so you have to start separating the archetype of the great mother and the great father from your parents, because you have to understand that those ideals of perfection are applied to you to find you wanting, so that you improve and so that you can leave the nest eventually. So she understands, she realizes that the standards by which her parents judge her will no longer be enough. And Telemachus goes through something very similar when Athena summons him to go to Pylos and to Sparta, and to leave the judgments of his mother and the suitors and everybody who's known him growing up. That your true father is society, and your true mother nature, and that you eventually have to be called to do what you individually are meant to do, regardless of how you're perceived by those people around you, who naturally, how could they know what it is you're meant to do, or what sort of potential exists within you? But what can know? The spirit that drives you forward, the idea of the self, or the animus. And so what does Haku do when Chihiro is overwhelmed by the situation? Well, she even starts to fade away and get stuck to the ground. And isn't that a childish solution? She wants to just disappear and do nothing, right? Exactly. And so who drives her to move? It's Haku. Who gives her a strategy? It's Haku. Who then actually flies with her, fails to deal with the first endurance test of holding her breath across the bridge. Well, that's Haku. He gets her through to the stairs, to that challenge. And so that's the innate potential within her, drawing her forward and drawing her towards the standard that society judges one by, which insists that one get up to a certain appropriate level of skill and an appropriate attitude too, because you have to understand that you work within a structure in order to maintain that structure alongside others. And Chihiro is just now learning that after sort of experiencing being the divine child her whole life. And now she's like the lowly adult, and it's like, oh my gosh, king to slave all at once. And actually she does go from that spoiled princess, right, when she first starts, to whose daddy has plenty of money, who can buy anything, to Well, no, actually, now you're sort of like slavish worker, and you're measured by your ability to work, your competency, and your discipline, and you lack both. And well, good luck.
Yeah, yeah. So he feeds her something from that world, right? And that sort of stops the vanishing
Yes.
process.
Yes, and that
Yeah,
is like you noticed earlier when we weren't on
yeah,
camera yet, a leitmotif. And actually, leitmotifs and recurring themes are important here, right? The music, like you mentioned, like there is that one riff that goes with No Face and just entering into the bathhouse, which is I don't know what the name of the instrument is, but it's like a sitar, and the noise is like dum, bum, bum, gum, gum, bum, bum, gum.
yeah, yeah.
Right. And then No Face also has his own music with some chimes like yeah, and then he makes his noises, right. But these themes, they
He's
recur
like
because
the
they
mime.
yes. Yes, I really have to develop some more thoughts on him, and it's a good thing that we're probably only going to get through so much that we're going to get through today, because I need to think him through a little more. Though I have seen some commentary on him by Jonathan Pageau, and I'd recommend that you watch that too. But I think we have some more to add to the conversation, and especially because we've seen this together, and we like Hayao Miyazaki, and I think analyzing his work. I think it's very much important to understanding our project of understanding, I think, literature and its evolutionary roots, and
Yeah,
sort of, well, I think we're going to find themes that go far deeper than the cultural level very fast, and we already certainly have. The idea of an initiation from being a divine child into being an adult who's measured by competency. It's like, yes, that's exactly Telemachus, who grew up as a
yeah,
prince, getting bullied. Yes, and in fact has Orestes, who's a much more accomplished man at the same age as Telemachus, leveraged against him. And in fact, I have a mother too, and I've had that sort of, look at this guy and what he's achieved at your age. And
yeah.
luckily, I'd read Nietzsche, and Nietzsche said, "What's it matter if you're 23 or 33 when you get your big break?" And well, that actually means a lot from Nietzsche, seeing as he was 23 when he got his, but also because he had such a big, his career was so short that, well, he only got to work or be sane really until he was 39. So perhaps early success
Yeah.
is no measure of success at all.
Yeah, no, but so the Telemachus connection, but I think the eating motif, right? The
Yes.
feeding something from the world, and the No Face, what he does is he sort of tempts you with a gift, but then
Yes.
he gets you and he eats you. And it's
Yes.
after he eats you that he gets a voice.
Right.
Because
Your
until then
voice.
he doesn't speak. And he
Because
speaks with your voice.
he's
Yeah.
like
The
sin,
thing that you can see.
who laid with Cain and created its sinful babies, right? It's like he absorbs you into it. He's sort of like Legion. He takes your voice. He's like an ideology that tempts you in a sort of a sickly sweet way, or like a siren that consumes you and then sings with your voice, I would say, which is not the traditional notion of a siren, but I would say is a very creepy and therefore good one. But eating, yeah. So it keeps, so Haku also, when Chihiro is feeling bad because she's confused about things, when he first comes to wake her up, when Yubaba has left the bathhouse for the first time, he comes to collect her. And why he can come to collect her is because Yubaba's not there, because when Yubaba's there, she apparently sees everything, which she mentions when she first meets Chihiro. She says, "Did a lump of coal help you?" Or perhaps suggesting that she can see all while she's there. So she is a divine figure. She's highly alert. And I'd love to talk about that too. I'm losing my point again.
No. Well, let's just, so you're getting to the point where they visit the pig farm.
So yeah,
and he got the food.
Yeah, so Haku puts a spell on her food to make her feel better, and later on, I'm forgetting the name somehow of the character who's actually played by Kristen Evil, I believe her name is, who plays Meg in the Hercules. What is the name of the character who sort of is the big sister role to Chihiro?
Oh, yeah. Lynn. Isn't it Lynn?
Lynn. That's why. Yeah, Lynn and Sin. Yeah, and Chihiro's name gets taken from her, and therefore she becomes Sin, and that's very deeply interesting too. It's as if she becomes indeterminate while she's there, or she has to earn her name. She loses her sort of divine given name, and now she has to earn it back.
Yeah, it's
sort of
that
like
process of innocence and experience,
you
right?
leave
In
Eden,
lake
where you
terms.
have a defined role. Now you're in the desert, sort of, and you have to earn your role. And then you'll be something like, I know it's mixing metaphors, but something like that. But yeah, so Haku does that, and also when Chihiro helps the river spirit, she receives a
Yeah,
magical piece of food as as a reward, and that magical piece of food she actually uses twice, right? Well, she tests it once on herself, realizes it's a bitter pill, so perhaps it's
yeah,
truth that he gives to her. Something to keep in mind. She also feeds it to No Face, and then he vomits out all the people whose voices he was
yeah,
using. So perhaps it's like giving somebody who's ideologically possessed some truth to free them from their slavish desires, or that which consumes or possesses them without them even knowing. And she also gives it to Haku, who has been poisoned by his poisonous intent to steal from Yubaba, and by this poisonous intent, she controls him. He has a malicious intent. He has the worst of the intents, because he essentially, like Cain or Lucifer, wishes to transpose the divine rightful authority of the bathhouse, because he's lost his place, right? His in the river, and he wants to take over a new one. And so he has
yeah,
that bitter pill, and it actually saves his life, right? Because, well,
yeah,
the reason that he was so injured is because what? He was trying to steal something rightful from a different figure of the divine, Zeniba, the twin of Yubaba.
yeah, yeah. Well, just to go back,
Yeah.
I always, maybe it's just the way that the voice actor for Hakud says it, but I always suspected that maybe he doesn't actually cast a spell on that food that he feeds her at the farm.
It's just
You know, it's
friendship,
like,
which is the greatest spell, or being nice
it's
to someone
just,
kind. Yeah.
it's like, it's enough for him to say,
Yes.
like, cast a spell on it to give you strength.
Well,
But really,
that's
she just
so
needs to believe
Well, and
in
that's
it.
so interesting, because, something we're learning from Peterson is that some of the everyday things we have are the magical things. So like the
Yeah,
reason the Bible begins, say like John, with the word, and the word was God, is that, that's a limited speech utterance that we attach meaning to, which then allows us to communicate information from one person to another, which is the ultimate act of imitation. So we can just imitate even the thoughts of someone else, and then that affects our behavior, right? Because if you know a new fact about a certain food, you'll stop eating that food, which means that your thoughts can actually directly affect your micro routines and your behaviors within the world, which means if I change your
yeah,
thinking, I change your life in a functional way. And so words are very special, but also food, because something interesting Peterson says is, you know how we say monkey see, monkey do? Well, that's actually a very stupid phrase of ours, because actually we imitate very well, whereas chimpanzees imitate very poorly, to their own detriment. Well, the second thing is that they don't share food except mother-child, but the dominant ones will eat first, and the same with wolves, and then they're sort of okay with other people eating. But we as humans actually share food, and it's interesting because I connect that to our information and trust circuits. If someone's eating the same food as you, you can trust them, and also you're sharing with them the same sort of information as well as food. I mean, so why do we sit around the table now? Not only to eat food and make sure that we're mutually not poisoned, and also to regulate how much we eat, because we regulate how much we eat based on the people around us, which is why if you eat lonely, you often will get disinhibited eating cravings, and then overeat and get overweight. Well, the idea is that we were drawn together through that trust, and then we started communicating information between each other, which is, I would say, also the notion of the Last Supper from Christ, and the idea
yeah,
of him as the fruit on the tree of knowledge that you eat from as the host in church, that it's not just the food that you're sharing with each other, it's the information that you each have acquired during the day. And so, like, say in America, when we lose the institution of eating around the table, I don't consider that losing a patriarchal a patriarchal institution that oppresses people into having to eat. I consider that losing a biologically motivated action, which has led to our success as a species through a properly evaluating the top process we have for imitating and sharing information with each other, which is the way in which we adapt in the world, and the way we have to adapt, because the world is both natural world and social world, and the social world is so complicated that we can't possibly understand everything that's happening and the reasons behind them. So we need people around us sharing that information with us constantly, which is, of course, why we have RSS feeds and Facebook and Twitter constantly. And it's like, so the institution of like eating with people, everything behind it seems to be smart. Not to mention the fact that you can resolve anything.
So I mean, that was a lot, but
I'm sorry.
One thing I would just reply with, like, to just like pick up on Haku's ability to use his speech, right? I found it really interesting that you saw the parallel between where he first enters the story on the bridge and where No Face first enters the story on the bridge. I was thinking maybe we could just talk about like the idea of the shadow with respect to No Face a little bit.
Okay. So the shadow.
You said earlier that he might be a kind of ideological possession, but it strikes me that maybe there's also something there where he's sort of the, the dark side of Sen's own self, which he has to kind of still integrate. Not entirely innocent anymore. So
I agree. And the Jungians say that symbols pollute each other. And I would say that No Face is a clear pollution of, say, that which is superficial and vague. And so he has no face, right? And so if he possesses you, you have no face. And so he's the shadow in that he covers who you actually are. But he's also sort of transparent, right? Which means that he's ultimately fairly superficial, not his own position at all. He's simply something which obscures. So he can be the shadow in the form of an ideology, even something that obscures who you really are. But I think that he's also corrupted, or at least combined with that image of sort of preliminary sin, because what he gets people on seems to be avarice and excess. Immoderate desire for something, usually gold, because that's what he seems to be able to produce. So he's like a false alchemist, right? He's a falsifier. He produces gold that's actually worth dirt. And you might say that that's what any overvaluation of a physical thing which is meant to have symbolic value does.
Yeah, so there's a danger maybe in like running away with the idea like, oh, like eating is always like this amazing thing. Like sometimes it's just eating, but there's also like, so just to not like put that in too much of a like A equals A kind of
sure. Right.
But like but I also found the idea that No Face, he's really ultimately quite harmless, right? As long as he in turn desires something which Chihiro will not give him, right? She will not let him possess her. And as long as she doesn't let him possess her, he has no power over her. He follows her like a shadow and is harmless. And she leads him all the way to this kind of like furthest removed from the bathhouse, which is the swamp bottom, right? Which is a great name.
Yes.
And that's where he sort of ends up, and he kind of takes the role of the apprentice, kind of like Haku did with Yubaba, but in this like gentler way of being the apprentice to Zeniba, like the twin, the antitype of Yubaba. And so, I found that really, really interesting.
If you give in to him, he possesses you, but if you give him a job, he becomes useful. And so it's sort of like integrating your aggression too. So another part of what she has to do now as an adult is integrate her anger and aggression, right? And so perhaps he's part of that as well. And so she actually does become more adult during this journey as she integrates more aspects of her personality, and she becomes more disciplined and more oriented towards the good and has an actual goal and gets her golden ticket because of her desire to help, which is to go see the Niba. But he gets taken, and then he helps to weave actually, right? And so that's very interesting because, Athena is the master weaver, and weaving, I've made the claim, is just the less abstract version of thinking, because you are taking strands and weaving them together in a synthetic way, especially with a braid with three, right? And so you have three strands, and you have one that's consistent and two that intertwine over it. And so it's sort of like a double helix or DNA or a Mobius strip or a thought, right? Like a Hegelian original thesis, and then you stand again to sit with the antithesis, and then you join it all together in a larger perspective, which then is capable of seeing larger and more perspectives, which actually comes all the way back from Dante with the three spheres of the sun, not original to Hegel.
Yes. I'm sorry, but the thing about what they weave is this like a hair tie for her, which is like beautiful, right? And it's
Purple.
the one thing that she takes back, like the one physical thing that she brings back with her. And so it's like the story, right? It's like
Wow.
she doesn't get to
Yes.
stay with her too. Her parents don't really remember anything that happened, but she not only has, metaphorically got the story, but has literally got this like artifact that she brings back into the world with her, like the world of everyday life. And that's
Physical symbol.
an emblem of what's changed. Yeah. I found that, yeah, very moving. I don't want to jump all the way to the very end, but one of the most puzzling things about the movie for me is the way that she's able to recognize that none of the pigs are her parents at the very end. I always found that sort of a Deus Ex
Yes.
Machina thing. Like, how does she know? How does she? Because she dreams that she can't recognize them, right? She
Right.
has that nightmare, and then when the time comes, it's like, but none of these are my parents. It's like not even a big deal. She just knows.
When I first watched that, the idea that popped in my head was the idea that I presented earlier, that ultimately what she recognizes is that her true parents are not her parents at all. And that if your parent is the thing that brings out the potential in the world, which is you, well, you are your parent insofar as you are the thing that brings your own potential into the world. And so she can't locate that thing outside of herself or project it onto some random pig anymore, which is essentially, and this might sound rude, but it's not, onto any human, which happens to be our parents. Well, instead she locates her potential within herself due to the activity that she is taking there, showing her discerning judgment, which ultimately that is what has developed in her. Instead of petulant childishness and not understanding the value of anything, she now shows the discernment capable of understanding even where the highest values come from. So she can make her own choices. So it's like, and I would say it's jumping the gun a bit, but it's like when Virgil essentially says to Dante that Dante's will is freed at the in Eden on the top of the purgatory, that he no longer needs a master. Right? Yeah, do as you will, because you now are the master that you set out to become, and so speak in your own voice.
It seems like
decisions.
It seems like that's where we are as a culture at this point. Like we want to be at that point rather. And yet we haven't gone through the actual like pilgrimage.
Right. We haven't done the work.
that do what you will,
Well, that actually strikes me as exactly what we would do, right? Like I mentioned with the parents, what is their immediate strategy for dealing with the unknown? To ineffectively over-evaluate the methods they use in the known world, which is the laziest possible solution, right? You just work a little harder without doing any extra thought in order to change, to alter your perception of the world, the map of the world that you use. And in fact, I think that probably is all of our coping strategy at first, right? Ignore it and keep moving on until it demands your attention. But Chihiro is rewarded with the fact that she immediately tries to explore. She explores the situation, and she stays open to the situation even when she's confused. And actually, that was something that I wanted to talk a little bit about. And maybe this could be the last topic we talk about, or theme we go over today, because, well, I could just talk to you forever on this medium, Wes, because not having the fear of losing every 5 minutes from the Anchor app, it's we get caught just kind of talking. And luckily you have your phone, you have a clock in the background, so I can kind of keep track.
It's not the right time, but it is there.
Well, at least I see something moving, so it's like a screen. Time is passing. And you can never step into the same.
So one more topic for tonight, then. So which one?
So I was thinking, once we get down that initial treacherous, so that descent. So there's a descent, a down going once we get there, right? So the way down is the way up is the claim made in both Christian circles as well as in the Divine Comedy. You have to go through hell in order to get to heaven. And in fact, we actually do have that literally happen here, right? We go down to the boiler room where there's a hellish guardian monster with 8 arms who recalls to me Briareus from the Iliad. And many arms in mythological traditions, whether they be Eastern or West, means high competence. And in fact, even in Mortal Kombat, when we were young, that was the champion of the Mortal Kombat tournament, a four-armed monster like Briareus. And he was super, strong and powerful, because if you had four arms, you'd be a nightmare. And Briareus had 50 heads and 100 arms. And so, wow. So he was smart. He was smart, competent, and strong. So terrifying. He and his three brothers. They helped Zeus, actually. So unclear exactly who is stronger. And so that's something interesting. So the fact that Kamaji is down at the bottom rather than the top. Well, first I made a Dante sort of connection here, which is at the bottom of Dante's heaven is the moon, which is the sphere of willpower, and where he first talks about the difference between the absolute will, the will of God, and the will of people. And the will of people basically can move in conjunction with the will of God, which stays constant, so that you can actually see the movements or the reflection of the will of God and the will of people. And so you have nuns there. But basically the idea is this: at the bottom of heaven, you have willpower used, which requires no skill. It just devotion and faith. At the top, at the seventh circle, even though there are 9 circles, 7 circles with people in them until you get to constellations in the crystalline heaven, you find the contemplatives, and those are the best thinkers. And so the idea seems to be that within a dominant structure, the two things that hold it together are will and intelligence, conscientiousness and creativity, and that in becoming conscious, humans develop those two capacities, fluid intelligence as well as willpower, so that we could choose that which we directed our energies towards. And so I would say that you see that in the in Christian symbolism. You see that in Greco-Roman symbolism through Hephaestus and Prometheus, and we can go into that sometime. But you certainly see that here in this mythology, the willpower that powers the entire boiler, or that powers the entire bathhouse, is at the bottom. And the choice maker, the intellect, the wisdom, the Beatrice, the Sophia, the Mary is at the top. And so you have the intellect at the top, the choice maker, the executive function there, and you have the willpower at the bottom, sort of like, and it's supposed to represent sort of like the heart, right? Because it heats and is sending magical fluid throughout the body of the bathhouse, right?
Right.
So that everything can happen. And is super powerful, and he has super many arms, and now I understand that means, like veins. And so I thought that was interesting, and just that Chihiro first has to make friends with the soot that he has enchanted. Well, soot, that's what's under your foot. That is what is of lowest value and simply has some willpower. And so what does Chihiro have to recognize about herself? Well, that potentially she can be like a creature with consciousness and intelligence making executive decisions, which is what I'd say millennials need to understand right now. But at current point, where does her value lie? In that she can just use her willpower to accomplish something in order to build up her competency, because that's how you develop skill at first. You're not great at something. You have to use your willpower to follow directions in order to do what all those around you are doing. And then maybe eventually you stand out after massive amounts of time and effort. But the first thing she has to realize is that she can do anything. And she even tries to give up when she first starts. But she can accomplish picking up a piece of coal and throwing it into the fire. And she realizes that even though she doesn't even have good manners, doesn't even know how to talk to the boiler man, doesn't even know how to be properly thankful, doesn't even know how to keep her head from bumping against the top of a closet, right? Which indicates that she doesn't know her place yet. She doesn't know how to keep from bumping up against people, because she doesn't even know how to behave correctly.
She's very clumsy, and that's part of her sort of like her aesthetic, right? She like stumbles down the stairs and she runs into the wall, and then she's like bumping her head. But I found it really interesting in the soot thing. She takes the little soot's job. Yes. Right. And it's okay. She does it out of compassion maybe, but also because she doesn't know what else to do. Like she's been told to do work.
He does take his job though.
Yeah, and then all the other soots, they notice, and they all suddenly like they all just drop their little coals, and it's chaos, right? And he has to ding the hammer over and over like a judge on the gavel, and put them back in order again. And he's like, get out of here. You can't take someone else's job. You have to find your job.
They lose the capacity to be conscious if they don't have a goal, which is interesting because, that's sort of depression too, right? Certainly there are physical causes, but say if you lose your job and you're conscientious, you become depressed because what do you do with your day all day? And so you develop pain symptoms, and then perhaps you become an opiate user, and then maybe you get off that, maybe you don't, depending on whether your industry still exists or not and whether you'll ever have a job again. Which, that strikes me as sort of a comment on the manufacturing class, right? They're coal that moves coal, and they're when they lose their jobs, they lose their enchantment that makes them conscious, which means that they lose their purpose and sense of meaning. And so they just sort of fall apart.
But it's a choice, right? It's the soot's choice to let the coal drop on their head when they see, oh, like that's how it works. Let me try this.
That's good.
And then
that is a little different. That is a little different.
It's the job of the foreman to say, no, that's not how it works. Like, get back to work.
Get back to work, right.
And then and then I also found it really interesting that Kamaji is willing to lie, right? So
yes, on account of Chihiro, right? Yes, this
is my granddaughter.
Yeah, and so whether he's lying or not, I think is open to question, right?
Oh yeah,
because perhaps he is a force of, say, like nature, and so and if Yubaba is, say, like she starts calling him her what granny by the end, right?
That's right.
As Zaniba. And so they are together the sort of holy grandfather and grandmother. And so it's Haku is sort of the young figure of the animus, but potentially Kamaji is also like the figure of the old wise man here, like the Yoda or the Ben Kenobi or the Albus Dumbledore or the Gandalf, who sees value in you before you have expressed it, sort of how Gandalf did in Bilbo, even though, were you to look at him, he's a little hobbit who just likes comfort and he has no value, or even Harry Potter when he first is picked up by Hagrid. It's like, he's just sort of a middle of the pack 11-year-old who lives in a closet. Doesn't seem to have much skill. And, Alice, when she first goes through her journey, she's just like a very appropriate young lady. Same with Wendy when she goes through Neverland with Peter Pan. That which is going to be revealed from her needs to be seen in her by someone outside her or something which exists within her, which is not identified with her. So like the figure of the old wise man could be someone outside you, or could be a figure within your own unconscious or in your own imagination, right? Or even a figure within a book to guide you, frankly speaking. And so this man says he's connected to her in some way, in sort of a loose and abstract way, in the same way that a grandfather would be. But actually, I'd like to explore that more. I've said some things, but I don't know that we've actually concluded on. But the fact that he is willing to lie to Lynn in order to get Chihiro a chance at getting a job so that she won't disappear, so that she can get her parents turned back from pigs, which is something we should keep in mind. The entirety of this movie, like Majora's Mask and for Zelda, there's a time limit, right? These pigs are going to get slaughtered at some point, and then they're going to get eaten, and that's going to be on Chihiro's consciousness forever for failing to do what was necessary to solve the dilemma. And so that's something that in repeated watchings has sort of I miss at times. That there's a sense of urgency.
Yeah, the pace of the movie is very different from what you'd expect. All right, growing up with Disney movies or something. Disney movies, there's always like a very clear, linear path. But this movie sort of meanders at times, and so you can lose sight of the fact that there is this urgency, and everything is sort of working together. It's just a lot more subtle than what you might expect in a cartoon. Fantasy movie like this, but yeah, there's a number of things that makes me think about as far as time and the flood, right? The flood that takes place in the movie. All the water imagery, I think, is super.
And you're going to be talking about In Search of Lost Time in your next podcast, right?
Yeah, I got time on the brain, right?
We certainly need to talk about time, then the flood for next time. Make some more connections to Earthbound, and I thought I would also. Make some connections with Final Fantasy VII, because I know that we used to often talk, and now we'll talk professionally now about our differences.
Right. Well,
that's what we were
that is a
preparing
game.
for.
Yeah, that's a game that we should do a whole little series on. Definitely, Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, and something I noticed here is something maybe we can get to work on is I might be able to do some sort of screen share so that we can throw up screenshots from movies and games that we do, just so that they're visual cues to help people out, because we have our imaginations helping us, and hopefully our listeners do too. But images are very helpful. Images are very helpful. They just help to put something in the air that, I lecture from, often images hanging on a flat screen TV on my wall in my classroom, and doing PowerPoints with beautiful high resolution pictures, and it makes a difference.
Yeah. Well, like you said though too, like this movie begins with the images, and then the words and the story sort of flow from that. And yeah, I think that's always good to
right.
bear in
That's
mind.
something we didn't get to talk about, that in the sphere of Jupiter for Dante, that's actually literally what he shows, that he has the spirits form the words deligate justitiam qui judicatis terram, which cherish the earth, you who would judge, or cherish justice, you who would judge the earth. And it's funny because that's the sphere of holy rulers, and you who would judge the earth, so you who understand it or perceive it appropriately. And the image is first souls forming out letters that form out words, and then they transition into an M, which represents monarchy or monarchia, which is a representation of God on earth for Dante, which is what the crown represents, as a golden circle, an image of perfect highest value, which then forms into an eagle, which I think shows both how the symbol forms itself into the most articulated form of itself, which is the word, which is why the word is made flesh, because you embody the symbol that you see in your unconscious and you make it conscious, and then you live it out. But also that it shows that how you reason back to the truth is through the word as well. You see what the word indicates, what it's broken down into, letters, but then you see also that it's broken down into what it represents, which is meaning, which can be found in symbols. And so from words back to original symbol that they represent, and from original symbol down to the most articulated tools we use to represent it. Words, kind of like our fingers are the most articulated part of our body, so are our words the most articulated tool we've come up with. Perhaps the computer scientists would say that actually we have something even more articulated, but I mean for general use by humans in an everyday non-macro and non-micro world level.
Yeah, well, right. Until we're all at the dinner table texting each other, let's just
and coding the reality around us. If we happen to be in visual reality or reality sort of place, it's like, well, let's figure out how to run some simulations and be good and bad in this world, and then maybe move on to the next world. And this one's tough enough. All right. Well, this has been Side Quest 1, and we talked for a while, and it was great to see you, Wes, and I'm going to get this uploaded to YouTube immediately.
Sounds good. All right. Looking forward to next time.
Looking forward to next time.
Well, then, take care.
You too.